begin by lighting our chalice in this Advent season, and Patricia and Max Child will be assisting with that. Our first Sunday in Advent reminded us to be patient. This second Sunday of Advent, we light the flame in hope that darkness will be dispelled. In this holiday season, may the darkness of winter be dispelled in this festival of lights, and may the darkness of ignorance be dispelled in the strength of compassion, reason, and sharing. Thank you. And for many of us, this is a bitter December. It's a chilly, gray day. Many of us watched in horror this week as fires ravaged through Tennessee. There were shootings, there was a plane crash. We are concerned about events coming up next year. It feels like a very dark time. And now we extend the welcome of this church as an oasis, a place where we can gather in community, take refuge, find a place to nurture the seeds of hope and love and patience and growth as we celebrate the world traditions around this season of light. As I mentioned, Dickens wrote the Christmas Carol soon after joining the UU Church. He summarized his faith as to do good always, and he believed that humanity always had a seed of good. And in his most famous story, he tells of one who did not seem very good, but who had a change of heart. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Ebeneezer Scrooge up to our pulpit today. And he's going to tell you something of his journey, and you will find how much of our UU principles are in Mr. Scrooge's narrative. Because Mr. Scrooge, at the very beginning of your story, when we encountered you, you really did not believe in justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and you would certainly abandon any kind of search for truth and meaning.
That is unfortunately quite correct. And to reveal something of myself, I will say that on that day, the eve of Christmas, I was visited first by two gentlemen who came in search of gathering for the less fortunate. My response to them was, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? And the pool laws? And the treadmill, are they still not in effect? And they informed me that they sadly were. And I said, that is good, for I thought something had stopped them in their useful course. To which one of the gentlemen said, but sir, many people would rather die than go there. And my response was, then let them do so and be quick about it and decrease the surplus population.
And that was your attitude, but you were also very miserly with yourself. You would not pay an extra pence for bread with your gruel.
No, I forswore any such meagernesses. A shilling saved is a shilling earned. And I realized that those shillings amount up to a great many things, and not all of them quite good, as I came to realize.
Yes. And your nephew Fred visited you and invited you to his Christmas celebration because he still believed in the inherent worth and dignity of every human being.
And I called him a fool. And I told him that every fool who goes around with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly driven through his heart. And he asked me, I asked him, why are you merry? You're poor enough. And he said, why are you miserable? You're rich enough. The passage you have in your insert, let me read it. This is something he said to me. I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come around, apart from the veneration due its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year, when men and women seem by one constant to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them, not as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on their journeys. My response to that was, he should consider a career in Parliament. And he left and he wished me a Merry Christmas, and I wished him a good afternoon. I have to confess that my animosity towards him was based upon the fact that he and I shared something very much in common. my beloved older sister passed, giving birth to him, just as our mother had passed, giving birth to me. And that was something my father held against me for many, many years. And unfortunately, she passed around the time of Christmas, giving me one more reason not to celebrate the holiday.
Yes, and you certainly did not want to celebrate it, nor even allow your employees to celebrate it.
My employee.
Your employee.
One wretched creature by the name of Robert Cratchit, whose pain, I must say, was greatly brought upon by my own actions.
But on Christmas Eve, you were first visited by the ghost of Jacob Marley, your former business partner, who endeavored to pull you back and call you back to your conscience.
Yes, it was. It was a bleak and miserable night, as bleak and miserable a night as could be produced by that season. I was in my night dress and waiting and finishing up a bowl of leftovers that I had for dinner. At that moment, the candles began to flicker. I heard the sounds of bells ringing. It seemed as every bell in the house was ringing. And then he entered, walking through the door. Not opening it, mind you, but walking through the door. I recognized him instantly as my... Actually, I did not recognize him at first. I could not believe who he was. My eyes, I thought it was impossible. Was I going mad? But the waistcoat, the pigtail, the chain he wore across his waistcoat, it was Jacob Marley. Dressed in the same single outfit he wore for most of his days and was buried in. I wanted to be certain of this. "Who are you?" I inquired. "Ask me who I was," he said in a hollow voice. "Very well, then," I said. "Who were you?" "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." And what was most outstanding about him was that he was bound and fettered in heavy chains that contained ledger books and cash boxes, and they trailed out long before him. I looked at him and I said, "Can you sit?" He said, "I can." "Well, then do so." And he took the chair opposite me, and he looked at me, those dark, shallow eyes, and said, "You don't believe in me." "I don't," I replied. "I don't believe you for you. I think you are more a bit of a meal that had been poorly prepared, a patch of mustard, some stale gravy, a bit of underdone potato." I said, "There's more of gravy than of gravy about you, my sepulchral friend." To which he rose and emitted a loud, howling wail. I fell to my knees, terrified by this. "Spirit," I said, "why do you trouble me?" And he told me, "It is required of every man to walk among his fellow creatures, partaking in their day-to-day existences, and if they are not to do so in life, then they shall be condemned to do so eternally after death." And I asked him, why was he bound in chains? And he said, this was the chain he forged in life, link by link and yard by yard. My chain was as long and as heavy as his. 7 Christmas Eves ago, the night he passed himself. Since then, I had added to it. And it was a great and ponderous thing by now. And I asked him, then why are you here? He told me that I had yet a chance to escape this fate, that I would be visited that night by 3 spirits. And I thought, well, can I not have it all at once and be done with it? At that point, he rose and stepped out and entered into the atmosphere. And I saw the sky that was filled with spirits. And I saw them, some of them, seeking to give comfort to a homeless woman and her child, knowing that they could do nothing. And that seemed to increase their pain greatly. I closed the window and went to bed.
And at that point, you were visited by several spirits who
I was.
Showed you much of your life, as well as the life of others. And in particular, the ghost of Christmas Present took you to visit your poor employees' family, the Cratchits, where you witnessed a family accepting each other, encouraging each other to spiritual growth.
I must say that I was shocked, I was stirred, I could not believe it. Here was a man who was living on 15 shillings a week. His oldest children who was being sent out to labor so that they could help the family along. But yet they rejoiced in the season. They rejoiced as if they were the wealthiest of people, and in many ways they were quite wealthy. For what they had in meagerness of belongings and possessions, they had a greatness of spirit and compassion and love for each other, something I myself had denied, as even that, the most simple graces of human contact, I wanted to have nothing with my fellow creatures. No sojourn, no intercourse, nothing. For upon looking at them and their sorrows, I was only reminded of my own. But what greatly touched me was the youngest, the one they called Tiny Tim, a lame boy. He hobbled about on a crude crutch. And as I looked at him, I turned to the spirit. The spirit was a giant of a man, full size of an ox, burly and strong, dressed in a great robe. I turned to him and I said, "Spirit, tell me, the little boy, the little lame one, will he live?" The spirit held aloft his torch and looked into it as if scrying for some future event. And he said, "I see a crutch tenderly preserved with great care by the fireside. If these shadows remain unaltered, the boy shall not live to see another Christmas." And then he turned to me and said, "But what of it? Better he should die and decrease the surplus population." My own words used against me, driven through me as that stake would have so been driven. I never felt a pain greater than I did at that moment.
And also around that table, when Bob Cratchit was calling on blessings.
He said that I should be included in the list. And his wife said, "Why?" And he replied, "Because it was Christmas." And her answer was, "Very well, Robert. I shall drink to his health for your sake in the days, but not for his." And I wondered how many others were out there that felt the same way towards me, which was only fair, and I began to realize it because I felt the same way towards many of them.
And yet you saw even further, through the evening, through the ghost of Christmas future, who showed you what would happen to you when your things were being sold off to the laundry woman and the charwoman.
It was customary in that day, my day, that undertakers also served as second-hand merchants. They would be compensated for the meagerness of the most meager of funerals by taking the possessions of the departed and selling them. Use your expression, flea market. You know where it comes from? Many of the goods that they took from the poor were often infested with fleas. So in buying clothing and buying bed linens and buying anything like that, you also bought the fleas that came with them. But the most terrifying moment of that encounter was when the spirit of Christmas future, a dark, somber figure, led me to my own grave, alone and forgotten. The way I had chosen to live would be the way I would be chosen to be interred. Not a single mourner. No one. I had less than Jacob did, for I was the only mourner at his funeral, and there was no one at mine. And I remember also the words of those men who were at their usual place of business where I would normally be, saying, "Well, it's liable to be a cheap funeral. They hope they provide a lunch. I'll only go if a lunch is provided." And apparently there was none provided, so there was no one there. And that was my epiphany. That was my road to Damascus. I realized then that I would keep Christmas in my heart every day, not just that day, but in every way possible. If there was some way I could avoid this fate, then let me do so now.
And so the next morning, when Bob Cratchit came in a few minutes late after his Christmas merrymaking.
That is on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas. I had myself, the day before, enjoyed a feast with my nephew Fred, spending the day with his family. I had sent gifts to Cratchit's house anonymously. I got into the counting house a few moments early, and I waited. The Clock struck 9. Bob Cratchit was not at his usual station. A few moments later, I heard the door fly open, the bell ring, and Cratchit run in and go to his clock's desk and open his ledger, acting as if hoping that he had escaped my wrath and gotten there in time. Then I said to him, "Cratchit, a moment of your time, sir." He came in, and I quite apologized. He said, "I'm very sorry, sir. I was making quite merry yesterday." And he said, "Oh, I'm sure you were. It's only once a year." And I looked at him and I said, "Cratchit, I have been reviewing your service to this establishment, and I shall not stand for it nor tolerate it for another moment. Therefore, I am going to raise your salary." When I said that to him, he thought me struck mad. I could almost see him reaching for the great ruler that he kept by his desk to strike me down and hold me there and call for help so I could be put in the straitjacket and taken off to Bedlam. And I told him, "No, Bob, I have not lost my senses. I have come to them. Merry Christmas to you, Bob Cratchit. A merrier Christmas than I had given you in many a year. And if you will allow me, I shall assist you in your struggling family. And now, you go out and you buy a new coal scuttle, Bob Cratchit, before you dot another I or cross another T, and we shall discuss your future here over a hot bowl of rum punch. A Merry Christmas, Bob," I said to him. I learned that day that Christmas was more than the commercialism. It was more than the shallowness of the advertisement and the purchasing of gifts. Those are the outer expressions. They're not obligatory. What is obligatory is a sense of compassion and understanding towards our fellow beings. To reach out to those who would otherwise be forgotten. A few moments, a kind word, they cost nothing but some seconds of your time. Yet to some, they would be asked if they would be to surrender their entire fortunes. I took the pain that I had endured all those Christmases and held it within me and held it against humanity, not realizing that in my own way I was contributing to that. For had not these people experienced it, had they not had these losses, perhaps they would be a more open and giving nature. Pain is inherent to every species that lives upon this earth. It is unavoidable. But it is how we choose to deal with it. Do we choose to continue it or lessen it? And that was the true lesson of Christmas that I learned that day.
As well as the interdependent web of life.
Which was best summed up by Bob Cratchit's youngest son. God bless us, everyone. Thank you for your time.
So this has become one of the most beloved stories. In some cases it's sugar-coated. But if you really go back and look at it through the eyes of Dickens' society and how people needed to understand what was around them in their neighbors, in their employees, and these are lessons that we still need so much today.
I invite you for our closing words to look at the reflection that Scrooge said earlier as he was talking. And let's do that as a reading together as we send off and go into the world today. I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come around, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem to be one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on their journeys. Go in peace. Live in peace.